So the function we have here, we displayed a strings character by character, starting from the beginning to the end of the strings. But now we want to display the string in reverse order. How do we do that? Let's create a function, a file that contains the print string in reverse. The prototype will be print string in reverse. Then the notation, the parameter type, we can say something like str, a pointer type. Let's see how to do that. So how are we going to print a string in reverse? If we look at in the print in reverse function for the integer, we had the int length. We had the length of the array provided, but in the case of a string, we do not have the length. So how are we going to print the string in reverse? That's an interesting question. Either there is two ways we can find the length of the strings. That's one way of doing it, or we can use other ways. But let's do it with the simplest one. We're going to find the length, and after that, we display the string in reverse. Let's declare a length variables. I'm going to call it length. Then determine the length of the string. So I'm going also to declare a variable called index. Great. So while str index is different than the null character, we say indexed plus we increment the indexed, or let's say, yeah, the index, also the length. So as the index grows, the length also grows. After this loop, we know the length of the array. The next step will be to loop the array starting from the from back to start. So display the string starting from the last index. The same thing again for we start the index at length -1. So the last index, then if the index is greater or equal to 0, we can loop. Then here we use minus minus. And let's display it using the printf function, the character format, str indexed. And after the loop, we're going to add a line break. Great. So we first determine the length of the string. And after that, we loop on the string, knowing that a string is just an array of character. So because of that, we do know it's just an array as any other array. So we start from the last index, then we loop backward to the first index. I'm going to include the stdio here because we're using the printf function. So the compiler would know how to use the printf function. Let's test the print string in reverse. The prototype, we have to add it to the main.h file here. And we can now test, since the prototype is the main.h file, the compiler would know how to use the print string in reverse. I'm going to comment this function here and call the print in reverse. So print string in reverse, str. Great. And let's compile the code. GCC main.h, where the main function reside. We also have to specify the name of the file that contain the definitions of our print string in the reverse function. The output file name will be main. Great. So let's execute this code. Now the string has been printed in reverse order from L to B instead of B, from L to A instead of A to L. This is how we print strings in reverse. The only difference between an array of character or strings and in an array of integer is that in an integer array, there is no stop character like the null character. But in strings, by convention, we do know that all strings should end with the null character. That's why this program is working. Great. For the print in reverse function where we pass in the int array, we had to specify the length. But for the print string in reverse, we had to determine the length by ourselves in the function so that we can loop from the back of the array of character to the start. An array of character is a string. Great. Now, what is the next step? Someone asked the question about the null character, why we add this null character. I'm going to define another ways of declaring a strings. We can declare a string like that. For example, we can say str with 11 character. This is a string, and A, B, C, D, E, F, G, K, L. So this is another way of declaring the same strings. I'm going to comment this one. So here is this way of declaring the strings is almost equivalent of doing the one here. But what happens, the compiler, when it looks to that, the compiler knows that when you declare something this way, um, it knows it is a strings. And what it will do internally will be, it will create an array, and it will also count the number of characters in between these double quotes. It will create the array for you. So the number of character here is 10. Now it create an array of an array that can hold those 10 character, but it will also add um, another elements or another character at the end of that array, the null character. The null character, it will add it implicitly. So the length of the array will be 11 instead of 10, because any string should always end with the null character. Now we can you can run the same function again, and it will give you the same results. It's the same result, L, K, G, E, F, E. So strings are just we can say strings are just kind of a particular family of array, but there is no, basically there's no difference between an array of integer or an array of int. Beside that, the data type is not the same, and also strings always end with the null character, which is a special character. And what happens is that that null character is used by convention to delimitate the end or to specify the end of a strings. So do not get confused by the words or the vocabulary. And when we say a strings, we're basically referring to an array of character that ends with a null character. If we say an array of integer, we're referring to an array of integer. We loop through all arrays in the same ways. So do you understand? Someone asked a question. The question is, if possible, can you explain why we know the string's length when it's forward, but we must find the length when it's reverse? That is a great question. So I guess the question is referring to the print string function here. Um, we can first find the length of the array. Then after that, we can also display using the length. I'm going to modify this function for you guys to see and understand why this is one way of doing it, but why this one is more simpler. But let's find the length first. So we declare a length variable. So we're going to find the length. While the character at index is different, the null character index plus plus, then length plus plus. So when the index grows, the length also grows. Now that we know the length, we can start displaying the strings. For index is equal to 0, index lesser than length, index plus plus. Then we display the same thing again, printf here the C and str indexed. And at the end, we display a line break. I'm going to comment this function, this loop out. I'm going to comment this. So the same approach works. It's the same as this one. So the first thing we look for, we determine the length. And the next, since we know the length, we can look through the array of characters as usual. But the loop here is much more simpler because there is a condition. We can loop through the array till we find a character that is a null character. So no need to look for the index, the length first. Then we can kind of combine these two loops into one loops. This is maybe the reason we can tell here. Or there is another way of writing the same loops, but combining. If we ask you to combine, the stop condition is, we know that we are at the end of we know that we are at the end of the string when we hit the null character. Here we know that we are at the end of the string when we are at when the index is the same as the length. But this condition can be replaced. So we can say str index is different than the null character. We only stop when we hit on the null character. We can either use the length, determine the length, but it is not necessary because this condition is much simpler. We don't have to find the length first and display our strings. Now, for the reverse, print the string in reverse order, it's important to know the length. Why? It's important to know the length. I'm going to display the drawing board here. When you have a strings, there is only two information you've got. The first information you have is where the strings start, but you do not have the information about where the string stops. So the missing information, but we do know that a string stop when we hit on a null character. So we have to first look for the end of the strings before being able to display it in reverse order. But in the case of strings, we do not have the length provided. We have to find it by ourselves. So that's why in the print string in the reverse, we had to find, we were forced to find the length before looping through the strings in reverse order. I think this is all for why we did not use the length in this function, in the print string function, because we don't need to do it, but we can. But here, if we want to display in reverse order, we're forced to look for where the string stops and start from the end to the start. By analogy, for the print int array, print in reverse order, here we had an integer array. The length was provided so we can directly know what is the index of the last elements. But in the case of print string in reverse, we do not know where is the last element, so we have to find it by ourselves. That's why we had to look for the length. Any other question? Great. Um, so uh, so that's it for this question. Next, there are different ways of writing the same functions. We're going to see. We're going to rewrite these functions without maybe using the indexes, but this time we're going to use only pointers. It's a very good exercise. Let's start. I'm going to comment all this out. Let's comment these ones. So we have our array of values. Great. So we want to display the array, print int array, but this time we're going to change the code, but here we're going to use pointers, print int array. So how are we going to use pointers? As we know, a pointer is a variables, and what is a variable? A variables takes the value from a set of take its value in a domain. So a domain is just a set of possible values the variables can take. And this domain is determined by the type, is defined by the type. For integer types, we have values from 0, 1, 2, or 0, -1, -2. For characters type, we have another domain, A, B, C, D, all the characters. So a pointer is no more than a variables, and it takes its values from the addresses in the computer memory. So there is no differences apart from the data type or the kind of data they store according to their type. Now we're going to declare a pointer. So a variable I'm going to call a pointer, and I will set it to array. Going to delete that. We set it to array. So the address, we do know that the name of the array is a variable, or it is a pointer to the first elements of the array. In the case of an integer, we knows this where the array start, the starting address. We know that. So I'm going to call this one start, and the end, the address of the last elements in the array will be the start plus length -1, plus the length. So you have the starting address. I'm going to name it more clearly. You might want to use shorter names, but for the purpose of this demo, we're going to call it like that. We know the starting address, and now we can loop from the starting address to the end and the ending address. This is in the case of pointers. We can use pointers to navigate on the memory locations. So while starting address is different than the ending address, what do? We can print. So I'm going to use the printf function, and we display integer values, so the integer format. And what do? We use the dereferencing operator, the asterisk, starting address. So here we're telling the compiler, hey compiler, you know the address, but now I want you to display or to get the value from that address. Um, so this is the notation we have to use. The asterisk standing for dereferencing. And now that we displaced the value from an address, we want to move to the next address. So the next address will be the starting address +1. So this is what we're doing here. So while the starting address is different than the ending address, we displace the value in the starting address, knowing that uh, uh, yes, but to make things much more understandable, people might get confused why the starting address is moving. This is computer, but we can make it more human, the code more human friendly or more understandable by humans. So I'm going to set, first of all, a pointer to the starting address. So the pointer starts from the starting address, or I'm going to call it current address. Yes. The current address will will be set to a starting address. Then at each moment, we are going to increment the current address to the next address till we hit the ending address. So that is one way of doing it. But this is only to make things very clear about pointers, and knowing that if you know the address of the first elements and you know the address of the last elements in an array, you can just look through the addresses and displays the values stored in each of these addresses using the dereferencing operator. Let's compile this code and see what it does. So we use the GCC command again, GCC, then the main file, then the file that contains the definition of our print int array. Then we give the OAuth option. Great. So let's run this code again. Yeah, we have the same displays 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to 10. This is because we've used memory addresses locations to display our array, knowing that the name of the array is a pointer or contain the value of the address, contain the address of the first elements of the array. So basically, the previous ways, the using the square bracket notation or the indexes is basically the same as using pointers. You know the address, so you can also know uh, uh, the value. But the reverse is not true. When you know the index, that doesn't means you know the value. But here, as long as you know the address, you can know the index. Any questions? If people have questions, they can ask in the chat or just interrupt and ask questions so people can listen. We're going to stop these sessions and start another one because we are at the end of the 40-minute limits. Let's reconnect again. By using the same links, you can use the same links. I'm going to stop this session and start it again.